How did you find the experience of turning this one into an audiobook?
Oh, easy, very easy, brilliant as always, Graham. But no, generally, if anybody's ever considering getting it done, having your books turned into audiobooks it's a very straightforward process. You just kind of, as long as you found a narrator that you like and you like their voice and you like not just their voice physically, but how they interpret the characters and read the story, then you should go ahead and do it. All you're doing is opening up your stories and your work to a wider audience. And you'll find that, I find at least, that the audiobook audience are some of the most dedicated fans that you get.
Magda threw back her head and let out a scream of frustration. What an idiot! I'm not helpless. I can fight. I'm a goddess. What part of that doesn't he understand? Why are mortals so complex? Why did I make you like this? Imelda shrugged at Magda. No clue. But you did. Whatever his reasoning, it's done now. We need to think of a way we can help him. Well, that's easy. We just march back to the teleport platform and step through. Magda walked her fingers across her palm to make her point. We show those messed-up machine things that were not to be messed with. Number 6 found our intrepid crew. For anyone who doesn't know, how would you explain the basics from sort of book 1 with Gareth and what? Because he dies, doesn't he, at the very beginning?
Yes.
No, in fact, he's dead at the very beginning. Just recap the very beginning, and then we'll place where we are for particularly book 7. But this current adventure kind of starts in book 6. But could you just explain it from book 1? What happened to Gareth?
Yeah, essentially he's dead at the start of the story, as you said, and he gets brought back to life almost by accident, at random chance, more or less, and brought back to life in a different world, a different reality that operates under different rules.
Because he is originally from our reality, isn't he?
Yes, yeah, and he finds himself in a place where kind of magic exists and it's codified and it's kind of literally cards that people use to cast spells and summon monsters and things like that. And kind of
he was a player of these games, though, wasn't he? Card games and
yes.
video games and stuff. He was into that, but now it's for real.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the kind of skills and things that he's learned, in our reality, playing kind of card games and things like that, transfer across into this reality, and he's able to leverage that into surviving. Basically, in a place that's vastly more dangerous than Earth might be at any time.
Yeah, the stakes are much higher. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
But he's now joined a group of people who are trying to basically save the universe. We don't need to go into the details, but they're trying to save the universe. And in book 6, the previous book to this, Diverger, him and his cohorts found themselves in a land. It was called the Land Down Under.
Yeah.
And in this one, they continue in the Land Down Under on this quest. They've got this massive quest, but there's also minor quests along the way that they have to basically survive to get to the massive quest. It's all explained in the book. It's not complicated. It takes you through it. It really is good. Now, obviously, the Land Down Under, I read as in book 6 as Australia.
Yeah.
And it's not Australia, but it's based on Australia, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. It's kind of the idea of a lot of fantasy tends to be kind of European based and that kind of thing. And the idea is, well, different parts of different fantasy worlds are not going to all adhere to that. So what would a fantastical Australia look like? What would that kind of manifest itself as? So you get to dig into kind of the kind of mythological creatures and things that exist in like Australian folklore and things like that, and kind of take creatures that exist in Australia and apply them into kind of beings that, like the Roo, kangaroos in this setting are a sentient sapient species who have, towns and tribes.
The kangaroos are closer to Aborigines in this book, really, aren't they?
Kind of, yeah. So it was just the idea of the whole thing. The whole basic idea was it was from that pun, was the idea that the Diverger are kind of your classic fantasy dwarfs.
Yes.
But dwarfs live literally in the Land Down Under, underground, in caverns and caves and things like that. And they're kind of the the pun there and the idea that because they're normally kind of Norse coded dwarfs in fiction, right? Your Gimlis and whatnot, they tend to be like Vikings or like Celts and that kind of thing. And the idea is maybe that there's something just completely different was a fun idea to run with, and it gives you a lot of inspiration then for the kind of monsters and characters and things like that come across.
Now, have you ever been to Australia?
No, never. I've
Well,
got. I know a couple of Australians, so it wasn't
yeah.
entirely without kind of research
Well,
and merit.
I lived there for 6.5 years. I actually started out on the radio in Australia. My first radio jobs were all there. And I loved it down there. It was great. But I don't think it matters whether you've been there. And the example I would use to prove this is that, bear with me because it's going to sound like
Yeah.
a stretch, but I'll get back to it, is Las Vegas, Nevada. Have you been there?
No.
Okay, I've been to Las Vegas as well. You've heard the Elvis song Viva Las Vegas.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trust me, from someone who's been to Las Vegas, that no other song ever written captures the essence of Las Vegas as Viva Las Vegas. That song perfectly captures what Las Vegas is about. Perfectly. That song was written in New York in the Brill Building by a bloke called Doc Pomus, who at the time had never been to Las Vegas.
Right.
So if it's good enough for him, it's
Yeah,
good enough.
yeah.
If he can write about somewhere he's never been, so can you, my friend. Even though the world down under is not Australia,
No.
but it is very Australasian for
Yes,
its influence. Like you said, instead of it being like Norse or Celtic with goblins, these are Australian type goblins. Yeah, it is good. Now, this is, for those who don't know, a LitRPG book. For anyone who doesn't know, how would you explain that?
Yeah. So the RPG is kind of a fantasy and to a lesser extent science fiction subgenre where kind of a lot of how generally the kind of magic and things like that is codified in a kind of very kind of almost video gamey rule set. Like it's numbered like you might find in a role playing video game, and kind of generally the ones that are well written and good apply that logic to the world and how that changes how the world operates. It's a very different world when the world's strongest man competition. They've got to have 15 blokes or whatever lift tires and roll them around to find out. But in a world where things are codified and numbered, you would just look at whoever's got the highest strength number and you'd know instantly, right? So it
Yeah,
changes how kind of society and people's interactions and things operate. And a lot of the best lit RPG books take that idea and take their fantasy or science fiction settings and then apply that in an interesting way that hopefully raises a few questions about how things work in our life, as all good genre novels tend to do. And it's a fun genre because there's less constraints on it than your standard fantasy fare. You can do more wild and wacky and fun things that maybe wouldn't fly in a serious fantasy novel. You know what I mean? It's a
yeah,
little bit more flexible, and
yeah.
because of that, you tend to get a little bit more fun ideas, I find.
Yeah, I like as well that you've originally, when in the earlier books, because they're building up these skills levels,
Mm-hmm.
the characters are duelists, which means they can attack monsters based on their powers. But there's also formal duels as well. But it was pretty much focused on Gareth's ability in these situations. But now you've broadened it out, and even more minor characters are becoming quite adept at their own form, at their own niche within that subset of skills. It's not like, Gareth would necessarily be in a lot of situations he'd be a star man, but when you've got the spider, when she's using it, and the way that the others use it in a way that it suits them because of their goblin affinity and that. I thought that was really nice just to broaden out the conflict aspect of it. I thought it was
Well,
good.
yeah, it's kind of a natural follow on from just good storytelling in general. You want to flesh out your side characters, you want to make the world more involved, but because the system in the books is so heavily based on real world card games, That's how it works in real world card games. You don't just have one deck of
Right.
cards that is the best. You tend to
Yes.
have multiple decks, and they follow different strategies to
Hmm.
try and achieve their victory. And a lot of the way the characters, their decks, and things work are real life card game strategies. So,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, Tax, the spider, her strategy of, well, I'm going to play a lot of cards that gives me a lot of mana so I can play a really, really, really powerful card much faster is a real world strategy that you do in card games.
Is it really? Okay.
Yeah. So in like Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering, something like that, it's what's known as ramp because you literally go up faster than everybody else. So it's a real like same with Gareth's kind of Goblin Affinity where he plays a lot of very cheap creatures very quickly, and then a lot of cards that add to their bonuses. And because there's so many of them, the overall effect is much larger. Is a is a key kind of component of what are known as goblin decks in real life, because traditionally in these kind of card games, goblins are that archetype, lots of little guys very quickly, and then you make them all 1 point stronger, and you've got 15 of them. That's a lot very quickly. So
Mm.
it's the idea of taking these kind of card game effects, like Magda, the way that her abilities work. There are a lot of there's a card game archetype again because these games are played by people who are of nerdy persuasions. They tend to have nerdy names. What's known as a Voltron deck, which is you
Okay.
take a creature and then everything else you play applies a bonus to that one creature until he's very very big and very
Right.
very powerful, like Voltron combined in the Lion robots, right? It's all one thing stacked together. So they're all kind of based on realistic and real world kind of trading card game archetypes.
Hmm.
But again, it's exploring that out then as how does that link? Because the affinities of a deck are based on a person's literal character, their
Yeah.
personality, and how they are. It's how does that interact then is the fun thing to see. How does Tax's ability as a all the crystal spiders have the ability to build very quickly because they're spiders, but because they're not flesh and blood, they can like spin houses and things like that very quickly. How does that manifest itself in a card game? And it's the ability to build something very big very quickly. It's that fun kind of element of tying the things together.
Yeah. It is really good. And you mentioned how the affinity in the cards in the set of cards that each character is their affinity of, how
Yeah.
it mimics the person who has it slightly. You know,
Yeah.
it's got something in common with that. However, with Gareth, it's working the other way right now, and he's turning into a goblin, isn't he?
Yeah, it's kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? Like if you're the way that the skill you increase your skills by gaining levels and defeating enemies, but the skills then change you back was an idea I had very early on that yeah, putting loads of points into a skill that makes you stronger with goblins might make you become more goblin-like over time. Was the idea of it, but yeah, the deck represents you in a way. So if your deck gets stronger, you're going to become more like it,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah,
And for most, let's mention the story, most duelists never reach that point. Most of them tend to be in most societies quite they're lords, they're ladies, because it's a thing not everybody has. So therefore, it tends to congregate in the people who already have power, and they're not. They'll go out and they'll do a quest occasionally, but they'll never bother to reach the high levels that kind of Gareth and his friends have gotten to just through necessity.
yes, yeah.
Like it's
Being
mentioned, like
pros.
Sakharine before he was trapped in the crystal and reduced back to being level one. Essentially, he had a full demonic form that he's lost and become like he was back then because he
But he
used to
never
have all
lets
those.
them forget who he
No,
was.
no. I mean, why would you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And how have the characters changed then over the six books? Do you think?
I think they've obviously grown a lot closer, and I think they've kind of been thrust into positions that they weren't necessarily expecting. Like Gareth just wanted to survive, and he's kind of become this kind of position of power almost.
A leader,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, the kind of various refugees and peoples and societies he's met, they've all kind of look up to him in some extent. Whereas like, for Magda, it's almost the opposite. She wanted to be looked up to and worshipped when she first arrived, and now the kind of weight of what that means that she's shied away from it a little bit and trying to strike up more on her own and not have to have other people kind of trying to do things for her or worshipping her and all of that. So I thought I always kind of intended them to be like kind of opposite trajectories
Mm.
almost. Kind of someone
Do,
who's got power and leadership and didn't necessarily want it, and someone who wanted it but realizes they don't need it. There's kind of
Yeah.
always the intent there with those, the kind of the two main leads, right?
It's a clever one the way you've written her, because in a previous life she was Magdalena and she was a god. I mean, there are effigies of her, not effigies, statues of her throughout different lands. But now she's Magda. She is different. She is more humble, isn't she? And a different kind of person to who she was.
She is entirely a different person. And she was literally like God with a capital G, right? She was the original deity who kind of brought all the others into being. And when they betray her and kind of remove her memories and strip her of a lot of her power, she's an entirely different person. She has no memory of who she used to be, and she's no idea if she'll ever go back to being that. So it's quite a weighty thing to know that you did all of these amazing, incredible things in your a life
And
that
she's
you don't
learning about a
remember.
lot of them as she goes, isn't
Yeah,
she? Yeah.
yeah, and it must be it's almost like when people have like an older sibling or a cousin or something, and they do, oh, they've got this degree and they've done this and they've done that. It's almost like that, but worse, because it was her, but she doesn't remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of kind of her coming to the realization that she is a different person. This Magdalena is gone for all intents and purposes. Right? She ceased to be. So it's kind of living up to this weight of expectation that is ultimately the biggest weight I think you could ever have,
Yeah.
ever, really.
Yeah. You were formerly a god. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. It's a pretty high bar, that one, isn't it? Yeah. And the romance between her and Gareth, why did you decide to put those together?
I think it's just a natural thing, realistically. Like they've been together in this thing since literally the beginning, right? They're the first two characters to meet,
Yeah.
quite literally in the first chapter, the prologue, right?
Yeah.
And I think if you had two people who were thrown in that kind of situation, I think that would happen. I don't think you'd be able to stop it, right? If you're
Yeah.
constantly facing danger and having to rely on each other and getting to know each other and fighting side by side through all these kind of things, especially if you're not like a professional soldier or anything, you're not trained for any of this, I think you naturally would fall into that. I
Mm.
think that you couldn't stop it really, right? You grow so close through that adversity that it's the logical next step, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's nice because you keep it just in the background enough for it not to become a romance, a full-on romantic story, but also close enough that you know there is something going on there. And you're getting the reactions of the other characters to it because it changes the dynamic slightly when they realize what's going on. It was very clever.
Yeah, I never wanted it to overtake the story.
Yeah.
It's ultimately it's kind of a fun action adventure thing, but I think just something like that just adds a little bit more richness and texture and reality to
Yeah.
the kind of the story and the situation. It's not real life. No one summons goblins and fights wizards, but you still want to have that kind of, if it didn't happen, it would feel strange.
Yes, it
It'd
would.
feel like
Yeah.
something's missing.
Yeah.
And you get that a lot, don't you? I don't know if you've ever been online, but you always get, especially in fan groups of books, people going, "Oh, this character and this character should have got together, and they never did that." Oh, it's
Yeah.
so obvious, and it's like, yeah, a lot of TV shows and books don't have time for this. This is quite a long series, so you can kind of work it in very gently, and it's taken a good few books to get there. But again,
Yeah.
I think if it didn't happen, I think people would be asking questions, and to me, it
Yeah.
feels like the right thing for the
Yeah.
story and the characters.
I can see it now how they work together and they fight for each other, and that they're a very closely knit team, which is also why it's great that Imelda and Sarkaren have got that. She doesn't like him, she doesn't trust him,
No,
but she is now and again. It feels like she's warming to him.
occasionally, yeah, they've
Yes,
definitely softened a lot since the
yeah,
first couple of books. Yeah,
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 but she's still wary of him. And he seems to be not quite as self-aware as he should be, so he doesn't realize how annoying he is at times.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know, and I love all that about it because that's what happens in close-knit groups. There's somebody who winds you up a little bit because they've got an idea of themselves that's maybe not as current as it should be. Because he was also a big deal before he was rescued. I suppose it would be rescued, you'd say it was, that he came in book, was it book 2 probably he arrived?
He's in book 1, I think.
He was in book 1, okay,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Kind of the core kind of 4 come together in book 1, kind of through the kind of course of the book.
yeah, yeah, and off they go now. They're trying to save the universe. Is it just me, or was there a bigger gap between this one and the last one in the time for them to come out? Was it just
A little bit. A little
was it a
bit.
little
I mean,
bit?
like,
Is there a reason for that? Did you need more research on this one or something?
yeah, when you're writing something that's about a culture that you're not part of, I wanted to try and make sure things are correct, especially
Yeah,
with the folklore based monsters and that kind of thing. But
right.
it's also more the last book kind of a little bit as well. It ends on a cliffhanger that leads into this one.
Yes.
And this is generally with the books, they've kind of visited a new place every book, and it's a new culture, and it's kind of been
Yeah.
almost a self-contained thing that progresses a large plot. This is the first time a book is directly led on from the
Mm-hmm.
previous one, and I wanted
Yeah.
to make sure that the through line of the two books connected properly, and that
Right.
it followed on one from the other to provide like if this didn't provide a satisfying ending to the cliffhanger of the last book, I think it would have failed as a story. So
Yeah.
getting that right and making sure things make sense and coming to that big climax at the end took a little bit of work to make sure things kind of worked the way I wanted them to. But I am
Yeah.
happy with the results. I think it was worth it.
It
The end.
is. It is great. The last two in particular, I think I've enjoyed more than any of the others. Um, they've all been great, but the way that the last two came together like that, and as you say, that cliffhanger, and then the resolution in this book, just great. Do you know at this stage how many you will do? We're at book 7 now, or are you just going to keep going till it's run
The
out of steam?
the kind of original concept was that there was going to be 10.
Yeah.
I think it'll probably end up a couple more than that. Simply
Okay.
because
So we might
like
only be
this
like halfway.
yeah, this book and the previous book, like in my original kind of conception that just kind of lives in my head, were one novel, and the
Right.
Dverga became too much of a book to be just one novel on its own, which is
Yeah.
why there was that cliffhanger ending.
Yeah.
I needed another book to finish that part of the story, so it might come to a couple more than that. Not a huge amount, I don't think, but
Yeah.
you never know until you get there.
And is that literally it? You haven't planned out. We've talked about this a couple of times, I think, about how you plan it out, and basically, I think you said to me that, well, basically, you've got a vague idea, but the books themselves and the characters within them tell you what the story's going to be.
Yeah,
Really?
they're
Yeah.
generally kind of two different kind of writers when it comes to writing novels. You've got what are called plotters, which are people who have everything laid out. They'll have like an elaborate corkboard and Google Docs or whatever of every single plot point and character. And then you've got people who just kind of write it as they go. I have like a vague idea where the plot is, but then if something comes up in a chapter that interests me more than maybe what I had planned, or maybe it's an interesting side kind of effect, I'll
Yeah.
flesh that out more.
Yeah. Especially if it's really working.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And again, it works differently for different people. You know, there's no right or wrong way to write a book. But for me, like the joy of writing it and getting it done is exploring the possibility in that story, almost as if you were a reader. But obviously, you're writing it. But kind of where does this go? What does that happen? And I think for me at least, that tends to lead into kind of more natural kind of things looping back on themselves. Like you have an interesting idea earlier in the series or in the book, and then later on you'll come across something and you go like, oh, hang on, I can connect that back to something else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, without spoiling too much, it's like there's a part near the end of this book that connects things back way back in the series, kind of right
Yes.
near the start of it
Yeah.
almost. So
Yeah.
just being able to do things like that for me feels like a more natural way of telling a story. But yeah, some people plot everything and that works brilliantly for them. You know, it's one of those things where there's no right or wrong answer. It's just if what you produce at the end is an interesting, compelling story, then however you did it worked, right?
Yeah.
That's how I think of
Yeah.
it.
You mentioned the joy of writing. Is it still a joy for you? Because I do hear of. I've actually not spoken to any, to be fair, but I have heard
it was on a podcast I heard some people talking about the torture of writing and how it can really grind you down. How are you finding it?
So I don't think they're wrong. Sometimes you sit there and you look at the page and you think, and you just like you can't get anything out, and that is painful. But when you do it and you look at what you've written and you kind of read through it, there is a joy there. You wouldn't put if you do find parts of the writing process painful, and that can happen. It's the same with any creative endeavor, right? You get highs and lows. But if at the end of it you're happy with the result, then it was worth it. I think in the
Hmm.
long run. Same with any musician. Writing a song might be a painful process, but if you're happy with the song at the end, was it worth the time? And they'll probably say yes, right?
Yeah.
I think that's just how being creative works, right?
Yeah.
And it's not really pain. The only thing you're kind of in pain at is yourself,
Right.
right? It's annoyance at yourself for not getting it done. It's not anybody else doing it to you. So if ultimately you didn't want to do it, you wouldn't do it, right? No
Yeah.
one's
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
one's
Yeah.
making you with a gun to your head to do
And the
this.
lifestyle of a writer as well. If you're having a bad day, you can just give it away and start again tomorrow, can't you?
Basically, yeah.
Is that so? Or do you find yourself driven that you have to write a certain amount each day?
I try and get a certain amount done each day, but you got to kind of realize that that's not always reasonable because it is, like I say, a creative process. You have a target to aim for, and it's okay to not hit that. If you're not hitting that every day, then you need to
What's
give
your
yourself a
target?
slap.
What do you like to get done on a perfect day?
I try and get a chapter done a day, and
Right.
how long that is varies, and it varies per book. Some books have shorter
Well, how
chapters because
long
you
it
want to
takes
figure
you,
stuff.
or how? Because I found very consistently your chapters are usually around about between 20 and 35 minutes. They're not normally
Yeah,
under 20. They're not normally over 35.
yeah. I try and
I mean,
I try and
that's
do a
from reading
chapter.
it. Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't have any
I
words
find
there.
my chapters personally are between kind of 2 to 4,000 words, somewhere in that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just the way I write. Right? I like my chapters to be kind of the thing with a chapter. I was always taught when I was younger, when you're doing English lessons and things, is a chapter in itself had to almost be a short story.
Mm-hmm.
Like a chapter has to have a beginning, middle, and end, the same way that a book has. And it's when
Yeah.
you add
Even
up
if the
all
end
those
is a
little.
cliffhanger, it's still an end. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea is the chapters are themselves very, very short vignettes or stories that then combine together into a larger narrative. That's how I was taught it. So I
Yeah.
think I write that way, and I think that naturally lends itself to certain kind of length chapters where you have that setup and then the kind of whatever the middle bit might be, and then the kind of payoff at the end. And again, that's different for every author. Some might not do that. Some might use shorter chapters for emphasis and things like that. But
Yeah.
that's just how I personally like to write. So I think that
Yeah.
just kind of a natural byproduct of how I do it. Kind of in terms of time, it can take anywhere from like I don't know 6 to 8 hours normally to finish a
Yeah.
chapter. It's
For a
normally kind
chapter,
of
right?
kind of somewhere in the middle of that. So just like a normal day's work, more or
Yeah.
less, right? It's not. But
Yeah.
again, it's different for every person, and I don't think there's a as long as it gets done at the end. I don't think there's a
Yeah.
right or wrong way of doing that.
Yeah. And you mentioned school. Did you have any other training to become a writer other than the passion to do it and being influenced by stuff you've read?
No, no. I did kind of higher education things. I did history,
Yeah, well,
um,
that'll help because that's
and
all
I
stories.
did history, and I did English literature. So
Oh, yeah, that would be a big
your
help, I would have
Shakespeare and your
thought.
Chaucer and that kind of thing. But no like creative writing courses or anything like that. More the study, which obviously does help to an extent.
Yeah.
Um, but otherwise, no. It's just a kind of passion for it and things I've got. I had a lot of friends who did do creative writing degrees, and none of them are authors. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't know what that says about that, but
I think some people get hooked into the education side of it, and they think the more they learn, the better they'll get, and they're not actually doing as much as someone who hasn't had the education but has just been churning out the books.
I think that there is an education in actually doing it, especially
Yeah.
when it comes to kind of doing it as a career, because it's not entirely just down to writing a good book. In a perfect world, that's what it would be. You have to write a good book that is marketable and finds an audience, and then you have to maintain that audience through kind of social media and that kind of thing. And you have to be able to arrange audiobooks, for example, reach out and kind of get those contracts and get those contacts. And that's a whole extra skill set that I don't think, for example, doing a creative writing course would ever teach you. It teaches you
Really?
how to write a good book, but it doesn't teach you then how to sell that book.
Yeah.
And if you want to make it a living, that is an unfortunate second part that you have to do. It would be
Yes.
nice if every book that came out made every author a living, but it's not how our culture
In
works.
fact, I mean, your books are excellent, but I would say that a well-marketed, okay book is going to do well than a stellar, badly marketed book.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
Ideally, you want an
you've got
excellent
both,
book that's marketed well, but
which is what you've got. Well, there's certainly excellent books. I don't know about your market. Do you want to talk about that, or is that a little bit of a secret that you don't want to give away?
no, it's more, especially in the lit RPG space. You can. There's obviously a whole side of being able to run like social media advertising and things like that, and I have done that in the past, and I do that off and on. It's not as huge. It does make an impact, but the cost of doing it means that kind of the revenue outcome from that impact isn't as high as you would maybe like. It used to be a lot better, but since kind of Facebook and things changed how their algorithms and stuff work, it's
Hmm.
nowhere near as impactful anymore. What I think
Right.
makes the most impact is kind of, first of all, it's just building an audience, right? Getting to the point where I am now is taking a lot of books, right?
Yeah.
A lot of
Like how
books.
many?
Oh, I've written and for sale under, obviously Tracy Gregory is a pen name. That's not a
Mhm.
secret or anything like that. But under my own name and Tracy Gregory, almost I think just over 30 novels
Yeah, that's
at
a
this
lot,
point.
isn't it? Yeah.
It is a lot, and
Yeah.
it's the same as, say, I mean, this is going up on a YouTube video, right? When you put out your first YouTube video, you get 10 views
Yeah.
or whatever, right? You might get a subscriber, and then your next video gets fed to that subscriber, so that's one view, and then you'll get another 10 views. Now you've got 3 subscribers, and then so on and so on and so on and so on, right? Every book that you release is going to bring you some new fans. And at
Yes.
first, it'll only be a handful of fans. But when you release your second book, those fans will buy it, and then you'll get more new fans.
Yeah.
And that becomes like a self-fulfilling thing. It's a lot of it is building that fan base, building that core of people who will buy any book you put out because they love you as an author.
Yeah.
And because online sales are so algorithmically driven, if you've got a core fan base who'll buy any book when you come out, you release a book, then what happens? That book comes out, gets bought by a lot of people. Your algorithms, your Amazon, your order will go, oh, a lot of people are buying this, so we should show it to a lot of new people, and then you get a
Yeah.
lot of new fans, and it's compounding.
Yeah.
And right, unfortunately, success begets more success in these kind of
Yeah.
spaces.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time. Putting out one book and expecting it to land straight away it's just not going to happen. Unfortunately, it doesn't even happen in kind of the traditionally published space. Every time you see an author and it's like, oh, they're debut author, that's not true. It's just flat not true. Never
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
No one is a debut author released by a large thing. They've written dozens and dozens and dozens of books, even if they've never actually been published, right? They're
Yeah.
very experienced before they get to that point.
Yeah.
And I think the key to marketing is ultimately write a lot of books.
Yeah.
Write a lot of
Yeah.
books,
Get a following. Yeah, it's the only way you're going to
get a
do it.
following,
Yeah.
put in all the hard work and get those books out and out there. People can't discover you unless you've got something to discover.
Yeah.
And you've
And
got
then your
to,
name is a brand, then, isn't it? And a brand is a promise, and they know what they're going to get. They know they're going to get a great book because he's got your name on it.
yeah. And the more people you've got who are fans of you, the more people they say, oh, I really like this book. You should check it out. And it's all self-perpetuating at that point, right? It is about growing your brand. You are right.
Yeah.
It's just that's the key, and especially in kind of the lit RPG space is more of a niche space, so people tend to be more hands-on with the authors. They're more inclined to kind of message you. I spend more time than I honestly would like answering kind of Facebook messages and things like that,
That's
asking
important though,
questions.
because you're
But you do
developing
have
a
to do it.
relationship,
Yeah, you
a
do
deeper
because
relationship. You're going because you got to go wide, but you also got to go deep, especially
yeah,
in your genre. I would have thought.
if somebody is willing to reach out and ask you a question about some obscure part of the book, right? Those are the kind of people that you do want to answer. You do want to take the time with them because they're the people who will then turn around and go, "This is my favorite book."
Yeah.
and tell 10 people to go and buy it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because they probably hang out with the similar kind of people with similar interests, as everybody does.
They do. Yeah.
So
100%. Yeah.
yeah. So that's very important. Yeah. So did you sit down and think of the niche first, or did you start writing it first and then go, I know what niche I need to target this at?
So I started my writing career doing. So the first couple of novels I put out were I released some urban fantasy novels,
Mm-hmm.
and then I did some just kind of pure science fiction books, as well as some kind of military science fiction books. And then I always had kind of ideas to release kind of lit RPG and things like that because there's a lot of overlap in those kind of genres
Mm-hmm.
anyway. And the Tracy Gregory pen name came about because I entered a competition with a bunch of author friends. What we did was we wanted to see who could basically sell the most books on a completely new pen name with
Okay.
a cover that was given at random. So we were given
Right.
a random cover, and with the title of the novel already on it, and
Yeah.
the name of the pen name already on it, and then we had to write a book and sell it and market it. And at the end of the kind of 3 month period or whatever it was, just to see who had sold the most. It was just a bit of fun, but also practice at putting out books and doing promotion and marketing and things, especially when you had no name behind it, to kind of maybe learn a few tricks or try something out you wouldn't do normally. And I thought, well, I've always was looking at doing a lit RPG and things, and so I did that as my entry. And Tracy Gregory was just the name that was on the cover that I was given. And of course, that picked up a lot. That was very popular. I put out a couple of sequels to that. I arranged for some audiobooks to be made. And the audiobooks actually are what I won that contest because I was one of the only ones who arranged an audiobook. And audiobooks are they're very for lit RPG in particular, they're a very lucrative niche. They're a big
Well,
part of my
audiobooks in all of publishing is the fastest growing sector in
yeah,
publishing.
it is. It is. And I
Still.
think
And it has been for about the last 10 years, I think. Yeah.
funnily enough, I was talking to my wife about this thing. She's a big audiobook listener. I'm not. I prefer to read an actual book or an ebook, but she likes an audio. And a big part of it is that finding time, especially nowadays when people are so busy, things to sit down and read a book is quite difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Finding time to listen to an audiobook is very easy because you can do it when you're doing something else,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
she's a big crocheter. She does a lot of
Right.
crochet. That's her hobby, and she will
Yeah.
listen to audiobooks as she does it. She'll do the two
Nice.
things because you're just using
Yeah. Oh,
your hands.
yeah.
You're not really thinking. You
Well, you
can
can
listen to them.
drive and,
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of friends
yeah.
I've got listen to audiobooks on their drive. It's
Yeah.
a big market that's people still want to book books. They still want to engage with those stories. They still
Yeah.
enjoy them, but not everybody has the time to sit and read a book, or indeed, not everybody has the ability. There are plenty of people out there with learning disabilities, things like that make it
Sure.
very
Yeah.
difficult. My father is dyslexic.
Yeah.
He just couldn't read a book if he wanted to sit down and do it. It's not something he could do, but he can listen to an audiobook and still get that
Yeah.
enjoyment. So I think there is a huge untapped market for audiobooks. I think it's the future. It's the old kind of listening to Archers on the radio of the modern day, right? But except you get to pick what's happening in the Archers because you pick the book you want, right?
Do you know why I think it's taken off? Because we've had book on tape. Remember
Yeah,
cassette books you used to get? I used to get books about, when I was in radio, I used to get books about how to negotiate, because you always had to negotiate your deal, And so
yeah.
I would get book on. We've always had, as long as I can remember, book on tape, but they were never as popular as the new downloadable audiobook. And my theory is it's based on the popularity of podcasts, because
Yeah.
podcasts got huge, and I think that's made people think, well, I listen to this in the car, or I listen to this when I'm fishing, or whatever it is they're doing, and they go, maybe I should try an audiobook next time as well.
Yeah,
I think that may have helped it, and that's why it's so growing so
think
quickly and so big.
I think it's two things because I remember reading an article about this, and a big part of the book on tape thing was the book on tapes were never aimed at a general audience.
No, they
They
were
were always
business and
intended.
niche. Yeah.
Well, not even that. They were always intended for people who were blind or had
Oh, were
very
they?
poor eyesight. Yeah,
Really?
the first release,
That was the origin of it.
that was
Wow.
the idea, is that they were books for people who physically couldn't read the books. And I
Right.
think the idea is that it's one of those things. It happens a lot where things are designed for people who have a disability, but it benefits a lot more people
Yeah.
outside of that. things like the proliferation of ramps, great for people on wheelchairs, but they're also great for people who have broken their ankle
Yeah.
or knocked a ligament when they're playing football, right? Everybody
Yeah.
benefits from there being a ramp into a building, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Bringing you shopping or whatever. So it's one of the things that makes life, if you make life
And
easier.
Daleks. Yeah.
I know, wow, they can fly now. It's fine.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Apparently. So I think, and then once people, the problem with the book on tape is that it's quite awkward to listen to a book on tape, isn't it? You've got to put
Well, you need a
every tape
player.
in
You need a
individually.
specific
play it.
machine to play it.
Yeah, and as soon as MP3 players became handheld and everybody had one,
and then in
get it,
phones. Yeah.
they're in phones, then it becomes easy accessible. So again, you're right, like podcasts. Podcasts are radio talk shows, ultimately.
Yeah.
But instead of having to tune into the radio at a specific time when you might be in work and you might not be there, or you'd have to, when I was a kid, you have to get like your brother to try and record it on a cassette when you weren't there, right? On like, do you know what I mean? You put two cassettes in, one next to each other. Whereas now it's like, if you want to listen to that interesting sounding radio show, you just open the podcast and you listen to it, right?
What's funny for me is, I was in music radio for a long time, and the number one thing the program director would say to everybody is, you all talk too much, stop talking, play more music. And in fact, some of them used to have things on the air that would say more music, less talk. And it was all about reducing the talk. So they've got it to now where, a DJ may only, in a link, may only talk for 12 seconds or something. And yet, meanwhile, podcasting, people are talking for hours on end. It's not a problem. It's about whether the content's any good and whether it's relevant, not how long it is.
I think podcasts and audiobooks, if you think about it, they're the oldest form of entertainment known to humankind is talking around a fire and telling stories.
Yeah.
Right? And what are audiobooks and podcasts if not just that?
Yeah.
Right? People will always want to listen to other people talk. Always want to listen to other people tell a story because it's built into us as animals, right? We desire it, we need it to survive, right? That's just how we've lived for these thousands of years, is by telling stories and talking to one another. And I think giving people access to more of that is a great idea.
It's wonderful for me and as a narrator, and to read such great stuff that you write, and the multi-dimensional characters, and it's just so much fun. How did you find the experience of turning this one into an audiobook?
Oh, easy. Very easy. Brilliant as always, Graham. But generally, if anybody's ever considering getting it done, having your books turned into audiobooks it's a very straightforward process. You just kind of, as long as you found a narrator that you like and you like their voice, and you like not just their voice physically, but how they interpret the characters and read the story, then you should go ahead and do it. All you're doing is opening up your stories and your work to a wider audience. And you'll find I find at least that the audiobook audience is some of the most dedicated fans that you get. And it's because a lot of it is they get that character, they see that character in a specific way because the narrator presents them in a specific way. They know their voices, they know their intonations, they know their personalities because that's given to them. Not everybody interacts with media in a certain way. It's like when you're learning, right? Some people learn visually, some people learn when it's written down, some people learn by doing. And I think the people who like audiobooks interact with stories better when they've got that character literally talking in their ear and they get to know them, right? They find that easier than reading it on a page and trying to imagine it all wholesale. And they tend to be the most dedicated fans that you can get. And you tend to have as well a lot of people who just getting your book produced in an audiobook, whether by Graham, fantastic, recommend it, or anybody else, is that narrator brings some of their fan base as well, who might not have listened to your book, but they like the narrator. And they do. It does happen. And you end up with like a symbiotic process where everybody benefits, narrators, authors, and readers. They get new stories, new adventures, new things to pass that drive to work. It's a win-win for everybody. You should always always get an audiobook done of your novel. There's no reason not to.
Well, these are wonderful, wonderful novels, and I hope I've done them justice in the audiobooks because I have so much fun doing them. I always look forward to it when you say, oh, the next one's out, ready to go. And I'm like, oh, great, really good enjoy today. Got the new book to get. Let's see how Garrett's going to get on in here and get stuck in. It's really good. So, Tracy Gregory, what's next for you?
So at the moment, I'm working on the second book in the Eternal Dungeon series.
Oh yes, yeah, that is a nice series. That is that has got almost as much potential to just go here, there, and everywhere as the Goblin Summoner, doesn't it?
Yeah. So they're
Wow.
working on the second novel in that series at the moment. After that's done, the plan is to do the next Goblin Summoner, but then also once that's done, or kind of concurrently, to do the second book in the kind of Goblin Summoner spin-off series.
Yes.
Kind of check back in with Jack and what he's doing and what's going on,
Yeah.
and kind of willed him out and things like that.
Yeah.
Because again, there are little seeds in this book that are intended to tie into that.
Great.
So we kind of check back in there, and then after that, who knows?
Well, continued success, and thanks once again for choosing me as your narrator. I really do enjoy it, and they are wonderful books, and they're just great. Tracy Gregory, thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham.